The hotel lobby was buzzing with people that evening, the kind of crowd that made every step careful and every word measured. Chandeliers reflected light onto the polished marble floors, creating a warm, golden glow. Layla moved quickly among the tables, balancing plates and drinks with practiced ease. She had been working there for nearly 3 years, learning to navigate the bustling space without drawing too much attention to herself. Most guests barely noticed her, and that suited her just fine. Layla preferred the quiet of being unseen, of moving in the background, carrying out her work with dedication and care. She had always loved music, though she rarely mentioned it. When she was younger, she would sit for hours in front of a piano at a local community center, her fingers dancing over the keys as though they had a life of their own. But life had a way of pushing those dreams aside. She had to work, to earn money for her family, to keep a roof over their heads. So music became a secret, a private joy she indulged in whenever she could steal a moment alone. The piano in the hotel lobby was a reminder of those early days, and sometimes she would glance at it with a wistful longing as she passed by. That evening, she noticed a guest who seemed to command attention effortlessly. He was tall, well-dressed, and had a sharp presence that made people step aside without thinking. Layla had seen him around before, always with a confident smile that suggested he expected people to cater to him. Tonight, however, there was something in his eyes that unsettled her. He was watching her, and when their eyes met, she felt an uncomfortable twinge. He wasn't just looking, he was assessing her, sizing her up, and it made her skin crawl. As Layla approached a table to refill glasses, she heard him speak, his voice cutting through the hum of the lobby. "Bring her here," he said, his words sharp and commanding. Layla froze for a moment, unsure if he meant her. She had seen people like him before, people who took pleasure in asserting power over others just to watch them squirm. But she had no choice. She walked toward him slowly, each step heavy with uncertainty. He looked at her, smirking, and gestured toward the piano. "Play for us," he said. The words were casual, but the tone carried an unmistakable edge. Layla's heart sank. Play here, in front of all these people? She had never performed for anyone outside her private practice, and certainly not for strangers who might ridicule her. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved toward the piano. The guest's eyes followed her, a look of amusement that made her feel exposed. Other guests began to notice the tension, turning their heads and whispering among themselves. Layla could feel their eyes on her, heavy and judgmental. The lobby suddenly seemed enormous, the chandeliers hanging like giant eyes watching her every move. She reached the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. She felt a rush of memories from her childhood. The quiet afternoons spent at the community center, the songs she had learned, the small moments of triumph when her fingers found the right notes without effort. Those memories were comforting, but they did little to calm the fear building in her chest. The guest leaned back slightly in his chair, clearly expecting a display of awkwardness. "Don't be shy," he said, his smirk widening. "We all want to see what you can do, or maybe what you can't." His words stung, and Layla felt a flush of embarrassment. She wanted to vanish, to escape the gaze of the entire room, but she knew she couldn't. She had no choice but to sit down and face the piano. The moment her fingers touched the keys, she felt a strange mix of fear and familiarity. The keys were smooth beneath her fingertips, and the familiar feeling of pressing them in the right order brought a tiny spark of confidence. She reminded herself that this was just another moment, another challenge. She had played for herself countless times. If she could do that, maybe she could face this audience too. A few of the nearby guests chuckled softly, clearly expecting a mistake. Layla's palms were sweaty, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She remembered something her piano teacher had once said. Music is not just about notes. It's about feeling, about letting the song speak through you. Layla closed her eyes for a brief moment and tried to center herself, to find that quiet space where she could lose herself in the music. The first notes she played were soft, hesitant, almost questioning. The guest raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. But then something shifted. As her fingers found their rhythm, as the melody began to flow naturally, a sense of calm settled over her. She realized that no one could take away the music she carried inside. No amount of mocking or judgment could change what she had worked for all these years. The lobby fell into a quiet hush as the notes lingered in the air. People stopped their conversations, sensing that something unexpected was happening. The arrogance in the guest's eyes flickered for a moment, replaced by curiosity. Layla continued to play, each note growing stronger, more assured. She was no longer the nervous waitress. She was the girl who had spent countless hours at the piano, the girl who knew the language of music better than anyone in the room could imagine. Some guests shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves, their expressions changing from amusement to astonishment. Layla could feel the energy in the room shift. The tension that had weighed her down seemed to dissolve as she became immersed in the music. She wasn't just playing to survive the moment anymore. She was playing because it was her truth, her voice, and nothing could silence it. The guest's smirk faltered, and he looked around nervously. The crowd's attention was no longer on him but on her. Layla's fingers danced across the keys, her movements fluid and confident. The melody filled the space, wrapping around every listener, drawing them in. The power dynamic had shifted. The person who had intended to humiliate her was now witnessing her brilliance unfold. In that moment, Layla felt a surge of pride and defiance. She had been forced into this situation, but she refused to let it break her. Instead, she transformed it into an opportunity to show her talent, to remind everyone, including herself, of what she was capable of. The hotel lobby, once intimidating and judgmental, had become her stage, and the music was her declaration of strength. The first part of her performance came to a close, leaving a lingering note that hung in the air. The room remained quiet for a heartbeat, as if collectively holding its breath. Then slowly a few guests began to clap, softly at first and then with growing enthusiasm. Layla opened her eyes and saw the expressions of genuine admiration and surprise on the faces around her. Even the guest who had tried to humiliate her seemed taken aback, unsure of how to respond. Layla rose from the piano, her heart still racing but her spirits soaring. She had faced the moment she feared most and had turned it into something beautiful. The crowd's applause grew louder, echoing through the lobby. And for the first time that evening, Layla felt seen, not for her job, not for her uniform, but for the talent and courage that were entirely her own. The experience had begun with fear and humiliation, but it had transformed into the first step of a triumph she would carry with her forever. Layla could feel the room's attention intensifying as she prepared to continue her performance. The initial notes she had played were like a gentle introduction, but now the real challenge awaited. The grand piano in the hotel lobby, a beautiful instrument with polished black wood and gleaming keys, seemed almost alive under her hands. Each note she pressed resonated through the air, filling every corner of the room with sound that was rich, warm, and confident. She glanced briefly at the crowd. People who had been chatting and laughing moments before were now entirely focused on her. Some leaned forward in their seats, their faces showing surprise and curiosity. Others whispered among themselves, sharing quiet amazement at the skill unfolding before them. Layla's heart still raced, but she no longer felt paralyzed. The fear had transformed into determination, and she was determined to let the music speak for itself. The guest who had initially mocked her now sat uneasily, his confident smirk replaced by a frown. He had expected a clumsy display, a few wrong notes that would make everyone laugh at her expense. Instead, Layla was revealing a talent he could not have imagined. Every chord she played seemed intentional, every transition smooth and precise. It was clear that this was no amateur performance. Layla's mind briefly wandered back to her early days of learning music. She remembered long afternoons at the community center, sitting alone at the piano, trying to master pieces that seemed impossible at first. Her fingers had stumbled, notes had been missed, and frustration had often threatened to take over. But she had never given up. She had persisted, practiced tirelessly, and discovered the joy of watching her efforts transform into music. Those memories now guided her fingers, each movement instinctive, each melody flowing naturally. The lobby seemed to fade around her. She was no longer just a waitress playing in front of strangers. She was a musician sharing a piece of herself with the world. The initial tension that had gripped her chest melted away, replaced by a sense of freedom and expression. She allowed herself to feel every note, every rise and fall of the melody, and the music became an extension of her emotions. Guests in the lobby were captivated. Some had stopped what they were doing entirely, unable to look away. Others whispered to each other in amazement, their voices hushed as though speaking aloud might break the magic. A few who had been skeptical at first were now leaning forward, eyes wide, clearly caught off guard by the depth of Layla's skill. Even the staff, usually unseen and unheard, paused their tasks to listen, their respect and admiration growing with each passing note. The guest who had tried to humiliate her shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He glanced around, noticing how the attention had completely shifted away from him. Layla could feel the subtle change in energy, the shift in the balance of the room. The people who had expected a spectacle of embarrassment were now witnessing something far more profound. A young woman revealing her talent in the most unexpected way. Layla's fingers moved faster, yet each note was clear and deliberate. She allowed herself to experiment with variations in tempo and tone, adding emotion and depth to the piece. The crowd responded without being prompted, leaning in closer, letting the music fill their senses. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty and sincerity of her performance. Others simply smiled, astonished by the skill and confidence displayed by someone they had assumed was ordinary. As she played, Layla felt a connection to the music that went beyond technical skill. Each chord carried her story, the hours spent practicing in silence, the sacrifices she had made, the quiet moments of doubt and the triumphs that no one had seen. The music was her voice, and for the first time in a long while it was heard by many. She could sense the crowd's admiration growing, and it gave her a new strength. She realized that this was not about proving anything to the guest who had mocked her. It was about sharing her passion and allowing it to be appreciated. A few guests began to clap softly, encouraging her, while others whispered compliments. Their reactions fueled her, inspiring her to explore the piano even further. She added subtle flourishes, intricate runs, and expressive pauses that showcased not only her technical ability, but also her emotional depth. Each note resonated, creating a tapestry of sound that captivated the audience and drew them deeper into her performance. The guest who had mocked her now looked embarrassed. He shifted in his seat, glancing around to see the reactions of the people he had assumed would laugh at her. Instead, he saw admiration, surprise, and respect. He realized that he had underestimated her completely, and the power he thought he held over the situation had vanished. Layla's performance had transformed a moment meant for humiliation into a demonstration of talent, courage, and dignity. As the music continued, Layla noticed a few younger guests watching intently, their eyes wide with wonder. Some of them whispered to each other, expressing amazement at how someone so ordinary-looking could produce such extraordinary music. Layla's heart swelled with a quiet pride, knowing that her love for music was inspiring others even in this brief moment. She had become a source of joy and admiration without even trying, simply by being herself and allowing her passion to shine. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence. She explored dynamics, playing softly in some sections, letting the notes breathe and linger, and then building intensity in others, filling the room with energy and emotion. The audience was captivated, hanging on every note, completely immersed in the performance. Layla felt a sense of unity with them, a connection forged through the language of music that transcended words or appearances. The guest who had intended to humiliate her now sat silently, realizing that the moment had completely escaped his control. The attention and admiration were no longer on him but entirely on Layla. Her talent, dedication, and courage had flipped the situation, transforming the power dynamic in a way he had not anticipated. It was a subtle yet undeniable shift that spoke volumes about her resilience and inner strength. As Layla continued to play, she became more absorbed in the music. The room's atmosphere shifted from tension to awe, with every guest caught in the spell of her performance. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she was sharing a part of herself that had always been hidden. The piano became an extension of her thoughts and emotions, allowing her to communicate with the audience in a way that words never could. The notes lingered in the air, creating a sense of anticipation for what would come next. Layla's fingers moved with fluidity, exploring the piano's full range, expressing subtle nuances and bold statements alike. The audience responded intuitively, their reactions blending into a silent dialogue with the music. Some nodded in rhythm, some leaned closer, and others simply watched in quiet admiration, captivated by the depth of expression she conveyed. Throughout the performance, Layla remained focused, channeling all her energy into the music. The initial fear and embarrassment had been replaced by a sense of purpose and confidence. She realized that this moment was about more than just proving her skill. It was about embracing her identity, her passion, and her courage. The music allowed her to claim her space, to assert her presence in a room that had once seemed overwhelming and intimidating. The guest who had tried to mock her shifted uncomfortably, aware that he was no longer the center of attention. He glanced around, noting the expressions of surprise, admiration, and even awe on the faces of the other guests. The realization that he had misjudged Layla completely began to sink in. She had taken a moment intended for humiliation and turned it into a display of talent, grace, and resilience that left everyone, including him, speechless. Layla's performance continued, each note building on the last, weaving a story that was both personal and universal. The audience remained captivated, drawn in by the sincerity and skill with which she played. Even those who had been skeptical or dismissive at first found themselves moved, their attention fully captured by the beauty unfolding before them. As she played, Layla felt a deep sense of connection not only with the music, but also with the people listening. She realized that sharing her passion could inspire and touch others, creating a bond that transcended social status or initial judgments. The piano, once a source of private joy, had become a bridge between her and the world, allowing her to communicate her emotions and experiences in a powerful, unforgettable way. By the time the final notes of her piece began to approach, the audience was fully engaged, completely absorbed in the performance. Layla's fingers danced over the keys with precision and grace, bringing the piece to a powerful, expressive conclusion. The room was filled with a sense of awe and admiration, a collective recognition of the talent and courage she had displayed. When the last note lingered and faded, a moment of silence followed, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then gradually the applause began, starting softly and growing louder with each passing second. Guests stood, clapped enthusiastically, and cheered, their reactions a testament to the impact of her performance. Layla rose from the piano, her heart pounding, her face flushed with a mix of relief and triumph. She had faced the moment she had feared most and had transformed it into something extraordinary, capturing the hearts of everyone in the room. The applause still echoed in the hotel lobby when Layla allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Her hands rested lightly on the piano keys, and she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The initial tension that had gripped her chest was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and clarity. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, filled not with judgment but with admiration and anticipation. They had been drawn in by her first few notes, and now she sensed they were waiting for her to continue, to reveal even more of her talent. The guest who had initially mocked her now sat awkwardly in his chair, his confident demeanor shaken. His eyes darted around the room, noticing how the audience's attention had shifted entirely toward Layla. Some guests whispered quietly, sharing their amazement with each other, while others simply sat in awe, unable to look away. The atmosphere in the lobby had transformed from casual chatter to focused attention, a quiet intensity that made Layla feel both nervous and empowered. She took a deep breath and allowed her fingers to glide over the keys once more. The music that flowed from her was stronger now, more confident, carrying the depth of her emotions. Every note was deliberate, every chord precise, yet imbued with feeling. It was as if the piano itself had become an extension of her thoughts and emotions, translating them into a language that the audience could understand without words. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the melody guide her, and felt herself slipping into a state of complete immersion. The lobby seemed to fade away around her. She no longer felt the weight of the crowd or the threat of humiliation. Instead, there was only the music and her connection to it. Each note resonated with her inner story, the long hours of practice, the quiet moments of doubt, the triumphs that no one had witnessed. These experiences gave her performance a depth that could not be faked, and the audience responded instinctively. They leaned in, listened intently, and allowed themselves to be carried by the flow of her music. Some of the guests had started to record small videos on their phones, capturing the unexpected brilliance of her performance. A few younger attendees whispered to each other, clearly inspired by her skill and dedication. Layla could sense their excitement and curiosity, and it filled her with a quiet pride. She had never played for such a diverse and attentive audience before, and the realization that her music could move people she had never met was both humbling and exhilarating. The guest who had intended to humiliate her shifted uneasily, feeling the growing disconnect between his expectations and reality. He had anticipated laughter, embarrassment, and perhaps a fleeting spectacle. But what he witnessed instead was raw talent, grace, and determination. His discomfort grew as he watched the audience's expressions change from surprise to admiration, and he realized he could no longer control the narrative. The power he thought he wielded had slipped through his fingers, and Layla had claimed it without saying a word. Layla's fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence. She added subtle variations in rhythm and tone, creating layers of sound that captivated everyone in the room. Her performance was no longer just a display of technical skill. It was a story, a journey that transported the audience from the first note to the last. Each chord, each pause, each delicate flourish communicated a depth of feeling that left the listeners captivated. Some guests leaned forward, their eyes wide with admiration, while others simply closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. As she continued, Layla allowed herself to experiment with the dynamics of the piece. She played some sections softly, letting the notes linger in the air like whispers, and others with bold intensity, filling the room with energy and emotion. The audience responded instinctively, leaning into the crescendos, feeling the subtle shifts and reacting with quiet murmurs of appreciation. The connection between performer and listeners was palpable, and it gave Layla an even greater sense of fulfillment. She remembered the words of a former piano teacher, who had once said that music was not just about hitting the right notes, but about telling a story. Layla embraced that idea fully, allowing each section of the piece to convey a different emotion: joy, sorrow, longing, and triumph. She became fully immersed in the narrative, forgetting the initial fear and embarrassment that had brought her to the piano. Now she was in control of her performance, using it to share her innermost feelings with an audience that was entirely captivated. The lobby, once filled with background noise and casual chatter, was now a space of focused attention. Every guest, from the youngest child to the oldest attendee, was absorbed in the music. Even the staff, who usually remained unseen and unnoticed, paused in their tasks to listen. Layla could feel the respect and admiration growing with each note, and it strengthened her resolve to give the best performance she could. She was no longer playing to survive. She was playing to connect, to inspire, and to share her gift. The guest who had tried to embarrass her now looked increasingly uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room, noticing the expressions of amazement and admiration on the faces of the other guests. He realized that he had misjudged Layla completely, and the moment intended to humiliate her had been transformed into a testament to her talent, courage, and resilience. The power he thought he held over the situation had vanished, leaving him to watch as she commanded the room with nothing more than her skill and presence. Layla continued to play, allowing the music to build in complexity and emotion. She incorporated intricate runs, expressive pauses, and subtle variations that showcased not only her technical ability, but also her sensitivity and depth. The audience responded intuitively, drawn into the ebb and flow of the performance. Some nodded along with the rhythm, others tapped their feet quietly, and a few simply closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The connection between the performer and listeners was undeniable, creating an atmosphere of shared experience and appreciation. As the piece reached its midpoint, Layla allowed herself a brief moment to scan the crowd. She noticed the looks of awe and admiration on the faces of the guests, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced her fears and turned a moment meant for humiliation into a display of skill and confidence that left everyone, including the guest who had mocked her, speechless. The applause that had followed her initial notes had grown, and now the audience was completely engaged, anticipating what would come next. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, navigating the piano's full range with ease. She played both softly and powerfully, allowing the music to breathe and evolve naturally. The audience remained captivated, their attention fully focused on the unfolding performance. Layla felt a sense of unity with them, a shared understanding that transcended words or appearances. The music was no longer just her expression. It had become a bridge between her and the people listening, creating a connection that was both powerful and transformative. The guest who had intended to humiliate her now appeared completely defeated. He realized that the moment he had orchestrated to embarrass Layla had backfired in the most extraordinary way. The attention, admiration, and respect of the audience were entirely hers, and there was nothing he could do to change that. The power he had assumed he held was gone, replaced by a recognition of her talent and presence. It was a subtle, yet profound reversal that spoke volumes about her resilience and inner strength. Layla allowed herself to be fully absorbed in the music, exploring its emotional depth and technical intricacies. She played with a sensitivity that reflected her personal journey, and with a confidence that demonstrated her mastery of the instrument. The audience responded instinctively, their reactions blending into a silent dialogue with the performance. Some guests leaned closer, some nodded in rhythm, and others simply listened, captivated by the beauty and sincerity of her playing. As the performance continued, Layla felt a growing sense of empowerment. She had taken a moment that could have been humiliating and transformed it into an opportunity to shine. The music allowed her to claim her space, assert her presence, and share her story without words. The lobby, once intimidating and full of judgment, had become a space of expression, connection, and admiration. By the time Layla reached the latter sections of the piece, the audience was fully engaged. Every note she played carried meaning, every chord communicated emotion, and every pause added depth. The room was filled with a sense of wonder, appreciation, and respect. Layla's performance had transcended the initial fear and embarrassment, evolving into a display of artistry and courage that left a lasting impression on everyone present. When the final notes approached, Layla felt a sense of fulfillment and pride. Her fingers moved with confidence, bringing the piece to a powerful and expressive conclusion. The notes lingered in the air and the audience remained silent for a moment, as if collectively holding their breath. Then gradually applause erupted, starting softly and growing louder with each passing second. Guests stood, clapped enthusiastically, and cheered, their reactions a testament to the impact of her performance. Layla rose from the piano, her heart still pounding but her spirit soaring. She had faced the moment she had feared most and had turned it into something extraordinary. The applause, cheers, and expressions of admiration from the crowd were a validation of her talent, dedication, and courage. She had transformed a potential humiliation into a triumphant and unforgettable experience, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. Layla could feel the energy in the room growing stronger as she continued to play. The applause from the earlier section had faded, leaving a hush filled with anticipation. Guests leaned forward in their seats, some holding their breath, others simply staring in awe at the young woman at the piano. Every note she played seemed to fill the space with a quiet magic, capturing attention and respect in a way she had never imagined possible. The guest who had tried to humiliate her sat back, visibly unsettled. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable as he realized the audience's focus was no longer on him. His smirk had disappeared, replaced with a look of disbelief. He had expected laughter, embarrassment, maybe a few awkward notes. Instead, Layla was commanding the room, her fingers dancing effortlessly across the keys, producing music that was both powerful and delicate. He watched in silence, no longer able to control the moment or the attention it drew. Layla's hands moved with a confidence that grew with each passing measure. She allowed herself to explore the full range of the piano, from the deep, resonant bass notes to the bright, sparkling treble. Each section of the piece had its own mood, its own story, and she let herself be fully absorbed in expressing those emotions. She could feel the music flowing through her, each note a reflection of her journey, her determination, and her love for the instrument. The audience was completely captivated. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them, while others watched her fingers move with fascination. There were whispers of admiration and surprise, as people began to recognize that this performance was far beyond what anyone could have expected from a hotel waitress. Layla felt a quiet thrill, realizing that her secret talent, once hidden in private rooms and late-night practices, was now being witnessed and appreciated by so many. She remembered the first time she had ever sat at a piano in a formal setting. She had been nervous, unsure of herself, and the fear had almost overwhelmed her. But now the experience was entirely different. The fear had transformed into focus, the uncertainty into expression, and the pressure into a fuel that propelled her performance to new heights. Every note, every chord, every pause was deliberate, intentional, and infused with feeling. Layla added subtle variations in tempo and dynamics, drawing the listeners deeper into the music. She played soft, lingering notes that felt like whispers, and then shifted to bold, dramatic sections that filled the room with energy. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in, reacting, and becoming part of the experience. There was a shared sense of wonder, a silent dialogue between the performer and the listeners that transcended words. The guest who had tried to mock her looked increasingly unsettled. He glanced around at the audience and saw the expressions of admiration, surprise, and even awe. The power he had thought he held was gone. The attention, respect, and appreciation that had once seemed his to command now belonged entirely to Layla. The realization of his own misjudgment was clear, and he shifted uncomfortably, wishing he could reverse the situation. As Layla continued, she allowed herself to fully immerse in the music. Her fingers moved with precision, creating intricate patterns that flowed seamlessly from one section to the next. She added embellishments, runs, and delicate flourishes that highlighted both her technical skill and emotional expression. The crowd was completely absorbed, their focus entirely on her performance. Layla could sense their admiration and appreciation, and it gave her a profound sense of fulfillment. Some guests had started recording the performance on their phones, quietly capturing the moment to share with others. Children whispered excitedly to their parents, amazed that someone who appeared so ordinary could play with such talent. Older guests nodded in quiet appreciation, clearly impressed by her skill and confidence. Layla felt a deep sense of connection with everyone listening, realizing that music had a unique power to unite people and convey emotions that words could not. The room seemed to hum with energy as Layla played. She experimented with tempo, dynamics, and phrasing, creating a rich and textured performance that held the audience in rapt attention. Each note was carefully placed, each chord thoughtfully considered as she navigated the piece with grace and mastery. The music told a story of perseverance, courage, and hidden talent that had finally been revealed. The guest who had intended to humiliate her now looked almost defeated. His attempts to assert dominance had failed completely, and he could see that everyone's admiration was firmly with Layla. The shift in the room's energy was undeniable. The once powerful figure who had tried to embarrass her was now overshadowed by her talent and presence. It was a subtle but unmistakable reversal that highlighted the strength and resilience she possessed. Layla's fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, navigating complex passages and delicate transitions with ease. She allowed herself to explore the emotional depth of the piece, conveying joy, sorrow, and triumph through her playing. The audience was completely captivated, responding intuitively to the nuances of her performance. Some leaned forward, eyes wide with amazement, while others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them in a moment of shared experience. As the piece progressed, Layla felt a growing sense of empowerment. She had taken a situation that could have been humiliating and transformed it into a moment of beauty and connection. The music allowed her to assert her presence, share her story, and inspire those listening. The hotel lobby, once intimidating and filled with judgment, had become a space of expression, admiration, and mutual respect. The audience remained fully engaged, completely absorbed in the performance. Layla's mastery of the piano and the emotional depth she conveyed held their attention entirely. Every chord, every note, every pause was met with focused attention and appreciation. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that she was not only sharing her talent but also touching the hearts of everyone present. The guest who had tried to mock her could no longer hide his discomfort. He glanced around the room and saw the expressions of admiration and respect on the faces of the other guests. The moment he had intended for ridicule had become a celebration of Layla's talent and courage. He could only sit in silence, witnessing the transformation of a potential humiliation into a triumphant and unforgettable experience. Layla continued to explore the piano's range, playing with a balance of technical skill and emotional expression. She added subtle nuances, delicate flourishes, and bold passages that kept the audience engaged and captivated. The music flowed naturally, guided by her instincts and her deep connection to the instrument. Each note told a part of her story, and the audience responded intuitively, becoming part of the journey she was sharing. The room was filled with a sense of wonder and appreciation. Guests were completely absorbed, their attention focused solely on Layla's performance. The energy in the lobby had shifted completely, from casual chatter to an immersive experience of music and emotion. Layla felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had shared a part of herself in a way that resonated with everyone present. By the time the final sections of the piece approached, Layla's performance had reached a level of mastery and expression that left the audience spellbound. Every note, every chord, every transition was executed with precision and feeling. The audience responded with admiration, awe and respect, recognizing the talent, dedication, and courage that Layla had displayed. When the last notes lingered and faded, there was a brief moment of silence as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, gradually, the applause began. Soft at first and then growing louder with each passing second. Guests stood, clapped, and cheered, their reactions a testament to the impact of her performance. Layla rose from the piano, her heart pounding and her spirit soaring. She had faced a moment of potential humiliation and turned it into a display of talent, courage, and beauty that left a lasting impression on everyone present. The applause from the audience had not died down when Layla lifted her hands from the piano keys. Her chest heaved slightly, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration flooding her senses. The room seemed brighter somehow, the light reflecting differently off the polished marble as if it was celebrating with her. She looked around at the crowd, faces filled with astonishment, respect, and admiration, and realized that something had shifted in the space. This was no longer just a hotel lobby. It was a place where her talent had been seen, acknowledged, and celebrated. Some guests continued clapping, others were on their feet, cheering, and a few wiped tears from their eyes. Layla had never imagined that something so personal, something she had always kept private, could touch so many people. She felt a surge of pride, not just for the performance itself but for her courage. She had faced fear and potential embarrassment, and had emerged not only unscathed but triumphant. The realization brought a quiet smile to her face, one that spoke of gratitude and quiet victory. The guest who had tried to humiliate her sat back, his expression a mix of shock and defeat. His confident demeanor had completely crumbled, replaced by a recognition that he had misjudged her entirely. He had assumed he could control the situation, but the room's attention, admiration, and respect had all shifted to Layla. The power he had thought he held was gone, and he could only witness her triumph in silence. It was a subtle but profound lesson about underestimating others and the strength hidden in quiet resilience. Layla allowed herself to take a few steps back from the piano. She could feel the audience's energy surrounding her, a wave of appreciation and awe that left her both humbled and encouraged. She had shared a piece of herself with them, and in return, she had received validation, respect, and a sense of connection that she had longed for but rarely experienced in her daily life. This moment was a rare and precious gift, one that she would carry with her forever. Guests began approaching her, some hesitantly at first, others with a sense of urgency to express their admiration. A few complimented her technique, noting the precision and emotion in her playing. Others commented on how deeply moved they had been, how the music had spoken to them in ways words never could. Layla listened quietly, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never performed for such an audience, and their reactions were more than she could have hoped for. Each word, each expression of admiration, reinforced the realization that her passion and dedication had meaning, that her efforts had mattered. Some younger guests approached her with awe, asking questions about how she learned to play, what inspired her, and how she had achieved such skill. Layla smiled, sharing small stories of her childhood lessons, long hours of practice, and quiet determination. She realized that her journey, her persistence, and her love for music were as inspiring as the performance itself. She had not only showcased her talent, but had also become a source of encouragement for others, demonstrating that dedication and passion could overcome fear and expectation. Even the staff who had been watching from the sidelines approached her with smiles and congratulations. They had always known her as a quiet, hardworking waitress, diligent and humble. Seeing her in this light, commanding the room, displaying immense skill and emotion, was a revelation for them. Layla felt a warm sense of community and acknowledgement, realizing that the people around her now saw more than just her role in the hotel. They saw her as an individual, a talented musician, and a person of remarkable courage. The guest who had attempted to embarrass her finally approached, his posture uneasy. There was a subtle tension in his expression, a mix of discomfort and reluctant acknowledgement. He offered a curt nod, a small recognition of what he had witnessed, and then stepped back. Layla didn't respond, and she didn't need to. The moment had spoken for itself. The audience had already judged, and they had overwhelmingly recognized her talent, bravery, and grace. No words were necessary to validate what had just occurred. Layla took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the quiet afternoons of practice, the patience required to master challenging pieces, and the persistence needed to overcome self-doubt. She remembered the moments when she had wondered if anyone would ever recognize her ability, the times when her love for music had been a secret, a private joy she alone could cherish. Now, in front of this audience, her skill and passion had been seen and appreciated. It was an affirmation of her dedication, a reminder that the sacrifices she had made were worthwhile. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Layla felt a lingering sense of connection with those who had witnessed her performance. She realized that the music had created a bond, a shared experience that transcended social barriers, expectations, and assumptions. People who might have never crossed paths with her had become part of a moment that celebrated talent, courage, and authenticity. The piano, once just an instrument in the hotel lobby, had become a vessel of expression, communication, and connection. Layla returned to her work after the performance, moving through the lobby with a sense of calm confidence. The atmosphere was different now. Guests and staff alike seemed to regard her with a quiet respect. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that she had revealed something extraordinary, a reminder that true talent often resides in unexpected places. She carried herself differently, not with arrogance, but with the quiet pride of someone who had faced fear and turned it into triumph. In the following days, word of her performance spread. Guests who had witnessed it spoke of the moment with admiration and awe. Some sought opportunities to hear her play again, while others offered encouragement and support for her continued pursuit of music. Layla realized that the performance had opened doors she hadn't anticipated. It was not just a single event. It was a turning point that would shape her journey and influence how others perceived her. She found herself reflecting often on that evening, considering what it had taught her about courage, resilience, and the power of following one's passion. She understood now that fear and uncertainty were not barriers but opportunities, chances to rise above expectations and reveal the truth of one's abilities. Her music had been her voice, her declaration, and her victory. It was a reminder that authenticity and dedication could transform even the most challenging situations into moments of triumph and connection. Layla continued to practice, more inspired than ever. The performance had ignited a renewed passion within her, a desire to explore her abilities further and share them with a wider audience. She embraced every opportunity to play, knowing that each moment was a chance to connect, inspire, and express herself. The hotel lobby, once a place of work and routine, had become a stage, a platform, and a symbol of her growth and potential. In the quiet moments after the audience had gone, Layla would sit at the piano and reflect on the evening. She thought of the smiles, the applause, and the astonished faces. She remembered the guest who had tried to humiliate her, and how his plan had been turned into an affirmation of her talent and courage. She understood that true victory was not about defeating someone else. It was about standing strong, embracing one's abilities, and allowing them to shine. The experience transformed Layla, not just in skill, but in confidence and perspective. She recognized that her music was more than a personal passion. It was a gift capable of touching others, inspiring courage and breaking down assumptions. The audience's reaction had reinforced her belief in herself, and she carried that belief forward, confident in her ability to face future challenges with grace and determination. In the end, the evening was not merely a performance, it was a statement. Layla had turned an attempt at humiliation into a moment of beauty, connection, and empowerment. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition were all external signs of what she had always known internally, that her dedication, skill, and courage were worthy of acknowledgement. The experience would stay with her, a reminder that talent, perseverance, and authenticity could create moments of lasting impact, change perception, and inspire those who witnessed it.